You're now listening to Gradually Speaking. From full stack breakthroughs to streamlining systems at scale, today's guest shows how curiosity, hands on learning, and a powerful mindset fueled his journey in tech. Clean builds, bold moves, and a few surprising lessons along the way. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Yash Desai.
Hello, guys. Thanks
So,
for inviting me, Vansh.
so,
It's been an honor to be invited, and yeah, thank you.
so let's start all the way in the beginning. What initially got you invested in engineering?
Sure, yeah. So, ever since I was a kid, well, it sounds very cliche and basic to say that, oh, I wanted to be this when I was a kid, but I did truly, really like the software space ever since I was a kid. And, like since I was in grade 3 or 4, I had my guys clear that, oh, I wanted to get into software engineering. I got my first computer when I was like super young. I guess I was probably in grade 1 or 2 or even younger than that when, I had my first computer. I was tinkering around with that. And I was also, thankful because I had a few mentors, my uncles and, my relatives who were really grateful to teach me along the way on how to work with software systems and operating systems at that time. This is like Windows 98 era, especially from where I come from. We used to not even XP was that streamlined. We used to have Windows 98 and then we went to Windows XP directly. So it was something, working with softwares, games at that time were not the great, but they were very easily like readable. There were files that used to store information on a .txt file and just read from there. And, just tinkering with games is what sort of got me into to delve into this software field. And then by the time I was in like grade 3 or 4, I was like, oh, building applications that sort of get rid of my inherent laziness of doing redundant tasks is something that I do like looking forward to. And, I set my eyes on software engineering or software development specifically, which just, coming from a brown community, it always goes towards being a software engineer instead of any of the other forms of software development. So, yeah, that's essentially what got me into interested into engineering and it expanded into what I ended up graduating with.
Right. So I was just doing research before this episode, and I came across your LinkedIn description, which
Yeah.
which I personally found really fascinating. There's a line in your description that says you were the go-to guy for resolving
Yeah.
any technical problems that the people around you had.
Yep.
Could you possibly share one story about it, where you felt like this?
Yeah, for sure. So the one of the biggest times was when I was probably in like grade 4, 5 or 6, I guess. Very
Mhm.
young, I initially came to Canada and went back to India as well. And at that time, the new like Windows Vista was like the rad at that time. And there would be times when like everyone probably knows how ugly and horribly created Windows Vistas were. So they would end up crashing a lot. Some people would have like a no recovery mode at certain times. And one of my best friends who was working on like this particular project file that we had for a submission, he worked on it all night, all few days. He could have procrastinated, but he had his whole data there and it ended up dying on him. And every time he tried to open the computer, he just couldn't get it to start. And he's like, oh, I have it due. I need to get it printed. How am I supposed to do that? And, like I said, I had dealt with hardware level things too and software too. So my go-to was, okay, let's get him unstuck first. And, I ended up just opening the whole thing, like laptop apart, getting the hard disk out. And we used to have these like very janky connector cables back in the day. So because I had like a computer, like a physical computer, I could just hook it up with those SATA cables and access the actual hard disk on my Windows version. And then just, fetch his data. We got that printed. And then that's sort of like what got me into, like the first time I also worked with bootloaders, which is something that exists like as a layer before your computer starts into like an operating system. And I tried to like, you know, use like a Windows installer disk, which comes as a layer before you boot into Windows and do a clean install with keeping most of its files. So that's how sort of like that's like one defining moment when I was like, oh yeah, I made it happen. And then because it was like a school buddy of mine that I held, it sort of became like a talk in my high school as well. So that was like a defining moment in my career, I would say.
Right. So a lot of this comes from just like having that need to help people. So that brings me to my next question. What
Mhm.
personal philosophy or process guides your approach when deciding whether to build something from scratch or just like improving an existing system?
Yeah, this is such a dilemma, and I feel that it is a problem with me. But I lean more towards building from scratch because I was just having a conversation right before our meeting in my work meeting as well, and this is something that constructors, building construction workers and constructors in general have the philosophy that it's always easier and much better to build a house ground up than to renovate a house. Just because there's a lot of potholes and hot wires that you can just get yourself into, which is going to end up wasting more time than, trying to build something from ground up because you have the core knowledge on how to build a foundation and then build something on top of it. So with that idea, I do end up leaning more towards building something brand new and especially, not getting too technical in this world where everything is becoming more and more modular. Software as a whole is now also becoming service-based. You have like microservices. So that's become modular where you can build everything from ground up. Even like computers are also becoming much more modular instead of being a single system on chip. You have like a processor, RAM, things like that. So my general philosophy is to build something from the ground up, but there's a lot of times when you making use of existing software is equally great. This is something that I recently learned as well, is if you know about like AIs like AI agents like Claude or ChatGPT, they have this thing called MCP server that you can make use of, which is like a middleman. It uses existing, services and provides that as a tool to an AI agent. So at that point, you're building like a middle layer, which is improving an existing core system which just lived on REST APIs, and you're just making it better. So there are times when a lot of systems are built to the perfection. I can be called an Apple fanboy, but I feel like Apple has a great perfection standard that they set. So things to build atop of that is much more easier because everything is documented correctly. There's pretty defined guidelines there, and there's going to be less buggy environments that you're going to face versus trying to work in a hot mess altogether. So you know, going back to the main point, like I lean towards building from scratch, but there are many times when improving an existing system makes it better as well.
Right. Uh, Absolutely. So it comes down to your needs, right? And how much time you have, right?
Definitely,
Uh,
definitely.
so how do you balance delivering client requested features with maintaining long-term code quality and system performance?
Yes. So with client requests, I do believe, coming like I've worked in three different industries before. Uh, Going from like a private sector to a startup to a public sector. And most of them have their own ways of working. If you go to like a private sector, like a corporate or, a public sector, those are very well defined that whenever a client request comes in, we're supposed to uphold more of code quality, at least to the workplaces that I've worked at. They do uphold code quality and system performance over what the request was. Working in a startup has given me a very different perspective where, client requests are more higher up because they're our revenue generators and they're the main reason we survive. Where code, like client request delivery, becomes a higher priority. So the way that I try to balance my way is that whenever a new client request comes, the first thing you have to do is clearly like create a design plan. And the design plan should keep in mind on what are the deliverables. What are some edge cases? You don't have to dive too deep into how many edge cases there are because that's going to overcomplicate and start putting you into this decision, paralysis by analysis. So you can't end up like working on the product because you're just constantly thinking about what the edge case is. So you put aside a time where you first get all the list of deliverables, acceptance criteria, and then try to form your own set of edge cases that you think are going to be necessary. It could be 5, 10. Don't waste too much more time on that. And then I would say start building it. Once you build it out, you're always going to find that, oh, after I've built, for example, many times you're working on creating a brand new table for permissions or something, you're going to come across the thing that, hey, I could have omitted these fields onto my permission system because they're being redundant. I can just fetch it from another table. So you would, as a process of building your feature, you're going to realize that some things can be omitted and they're going to help you for code quality and system performance in the long run as well. So I would say coming up with a design plan, deciding a little bit amount of your time, maybe 5 to 10% of your timeline, just to finding edge cases, but no more than that, and then start building. We live in an agile world where you keep, building in iterations. So once you finish first phase, you're obviously going to hit more roadblocks and want to, improvise on that.
I see. Um, so I believe this involves a lot of planning, right?
It
And
does.
and there's also you'll also find bugs while implementation. That's like a given, right? So what project challenged your debugging or problem solving skills the most, and how did you overcome it?
For sure. So there's two particular ones, and both sort of deal with something. There's two instances that have challenged both sides of things. One with really debugging, and the other one with the problem solving side. So I guess I'll discuss a little bit on both sections. First one, coming to debugging, there are times when working with a live system is always different than working on your local environment, just because you can't think of all the scenarios. Like, going back to my old thing that you can never always find out all the edge cases because there's infinite many possibilities how a person can approach it. It's like the same where you can never run out of bugs because bugs will always exist in the system as you can't predict how the user is going to work. He is going to find a way to break your system. One of the times that really stuck with me for debugging was when we had one of our biggest client in my current company. They were stuck on this particular matter, which is one of the pages, or we have matters in our system, which is like a core component of an application where people do their work, like lawyers do their work. And the biggest part was that they just couldn't open the matter at all because every time they were trying to load, it would fail. Now, because we recently moved to a new environment, the debugging wasn't at the level. So every time every time we tried to make the request, it would error out on the server. There were no logs, and you could never really trace back on what happened unless and until you have a copy of the same version working. But there was this cool thing where we could revert to a classic view, and that one worked on a client-sided logic, where the whole business logic was being played out on the client side instead of the server side. And now I had the ability to go Chrome inspect and then play around with the actual code that we have. Even though it's bundled up into this jumbo JavaScript, the core components and the logic still stays the same that, oh, am I looking for a null check? Am I looking for if the variable is of a certain type or not? And at that point, that is like the biggest way you once you have an access to a playground of sorts, I think that's like the perfect way to debug an issue. Once you get a playground, you try to work with what components are actually affecting the performance. So in my case, it was a null field that was never supposed to be null, but because it was set to null at the time of initiation, it failed. The simple fix was to try and just assign it a value at start, like an empty object type, and that would just let the whole object run. And once that ran, it would, play out beautifully. But to find that point, you need a playground. So in my sense, the best way to debug is to have like a little playground or a reproable case where you can get into the same spot. And once you get a solution for it, you're then supposed to make a plan of how this can never happen again. Um, Something like, going back to the problem solving side of things, this doesn't really, like my first case wasn't really talking about problem solving because it was just a bug in our system, just a null check that was never found, but that caused a lot of delay with the customer. But there's lots of times when problem solving helps a lot with many times when we build system, like I said, you start building from scratch and or when a client feature comes or anything and you're trying to build something, you make a design plan, start build, and then that's out. What happens generally is that because of our core logic of don't fix what's not broken, we end up keeping hacks in our system. And that leads up to increasing times and causing performance issue over time. So that was something that happened with one of our core components with importing and search, where we had a basic query that we kept on adding more and more components to it. And that ended up becoming this huge pile that now was taking up most of the time of the server, causing garbage collection and not allowing us to ever proceed with getting information fast enough and getting holdups for everyone. So, in that sense, the problem solving mind of mine was what is the core issue? Why are we joining tables in one long query and constantly getting it when the data exists on almost like 2 to 3 levels? If anything, we could create relationships and just get one source of truth. And my idea of problem solving generally is to look at the problem at first, find out what's going wrong, and then fix that to see why it caused the problem in the first place. You can get a customer unstuck right now by just fixing the null check, but you also have to find out why this happened. And to go to the root cause, you can trace back to what initially caused this to exist in the first place. Once you find out, you can build different approaches on how to, you know, maybe the initialization was never needed. You don't need this variable. You can just use data directly raw from the response or however you want to approach it. Another thing that I do notice is that with problem solving, it's really important to think, it's really important to have like a second perspective. I've had many times where I'm just staring at a code, I don't find a solution, and then I'm just, on a call with my colleague, and I'm like, okay, go with me and follow with me. And while I'm going over it, I'm like, why is that particular variable there or line there at all? You know, proofreading is one thing, but when you have like this rubber ducky syndrome where you're talking to someone else, it makes a huge difference. Because when you're trying to explain it to someone else, that just puts you in a very different perspective. Like it brings you out of the box for me. And I can just quickly see what the problem was and it just solves for me. So that's, how I've dealt with in the past, essentially.
Yeah, I believe you mentioned it, like rubber duck debugging, where just like you explain your problem to like an inanimate object, like it can be a rubber duck, right? You just talk to it
Exactly.
about your problem and it gives you the solution, and then you're like, thank you, rubber duck, right? Um, so you need to be a little bit introspective in our field, I guess, where you have to kind of look at the problem from the outside, right?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so you have a versatile skill set. It's not only technical. You have also had leadership roles and teaching assistant roles where
Yes.
where you have led some of these classes where you have shared your technical knowledge. So I just wanted to know, how do you explain like technical concepts to non-technical listeners?
For sure. One thing that I've really learned about like teaching, and I'll be very honest. Like when I initially used to do peer teaching and all that, I used to think that I'm an amazing teacher because everyone had that base foundation, not foundational knowledge. So all I had to do was just provide them the correct type of Lego block, and it all fell into place like Legos. It's just building one on top of another. But when you in the teaching industry especially, is you even in leadership, you come across people who are coming from very different backgrounds. So you really have to sometimes go from how this is my approach personally, because I've dealt with like seniors, elderlies that I'm trying to teach. Even at my current company, we have this new employee that came from a law field with zero technical knowledge and coming into our software, which is extremely tech heavy. So even as, a legal assistant, she's supposed to know how to work with logics and codes. And my basic approach is that, okay, take a step back all the way to the start, how I learned on, you know, understanding code. What was it that taught me how to work with a program? And one of the key concepts that I think are great in teaching and leadership is there has to be a nice system. And this is more definitely towards the leadership side and less towards this teaching side. But, it generally still applies that you have to have a nice balance of appreciation and repercussions. If you keep on appreciating and when you're teaching, oh, great, you got this right. Now we take a step above. But you're not supposed to baby feed someone, especially, and I'm being pretty blunt. When you come into like the workspace, no one is going to like spoon feed you information. You're going to given a project, you're supposed to build yourself. Yeah, there's lots of people you can talk to, but that also depends on the workspace you're in. So some places, my best friend works at a company where people barely, respond to him. So at that time, he has to do all of the learning by himself. So you can't keep spoon feeding information, but resources of how you teach are important. So, like I said, take a step back to what taught you, give that a shot. For me, visual learning was a great thing. I used to learn from videos and having like a live example in front of me. If I see a mathematical formula being used in front of me, I'll understand how the working works and try to trace back to it. That's not true for everyone. So how did I learn to do 1 plus 1? Or how did I learn to write the code? And at that point, I'm, teaching my colleague to how to code. And the way that I started is how does logic work? Because at the end of the day, computer is logic, and you're supposed to learn if you have logic inside of you. You know, I say logic in a very spread out sense because people use logic as like a derogatory term that, oh, it's logical, it's simple. But it's not true. Logic is a different type of thinking that if you had to approach something, do you follow it step by step? Do you look at different paths? That's what, in my mind, is a logic. So took a step back. I tried to explain her the logical side of things. Once she explained the if statements, in real world, you have, oh, if, a person came up to you with a state admin situation or something, are there two scenarios for that? If so, how do you deal with it? So in your mind, that's an if statement. What's the variable? The variable is what the request to us. And then you're assessing based on the type. So that is my general approach in leadership as well as like teaching assistant is that start from the ground up. If their mentality is different, there's people who are equally like, you're in software field as well, right? I believe.
Computer science, yes.
Computer science, yes. So you have similar mentality as me. So I don't have to spoon feed you from the start. That wouldn't make sense. You already have the foundation there. All I had to do is give you that different perspective that, hey, instead of trying to approach, a problem with a basic sense, you can maybe use derivatives, or you could have probably used integration. You could have just squared the value, used Pythagorean theorem instead of just calculating the distance from A to B. So that is how I see is that you have to first figure out what category a person belongs to, and then based on the category, you decide where you start off with.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's just DSA, right? Every problem comes down to just plain old DSA.
That is correct.
Um, but like I said, this all this learning came from experience, right?
Yes.
And you get experience by just putting yourself out there. Like you are never ready for a situation, right? You are
Yeah.
you're gonna suck even initially, and then you just get better at it, right? So
Mhm.
what is one mistake or misstep that you overcome in your career and that has taught you the most?
Yes. I can definitely talk about one mistake that, it still haunts back till today as well. One thing that I've really learned in generalness is that you always have to have clear documentation and clear, I call it journaling on your side of things. You don't have to note every little detail of your life down, but it is very important to keep track of what communication have happened and what was the decision at that time. One of the key examples is in my current company where I was supposed to work on this brand new feature on a new product line. And when I started working, we had lots of conversations. We had three different product leaders trying to decide what they wanted to do with this feature. And obviously, when you're starting a new feature, you can't just implement all the directions. You have to go in base of priority and which feature, what is the main idea of the feature, where everyone draws their own vision of what a feature is supposed to be. Um, assets and liabilities is the feature that we're talking about. So corporate uses it differently, estate planning uses differently, and we're in this limbo where we need one deciding power on what direction we should go in. But everyone is a human after all. When I had this discussion, we decided that we'll focus on estate planning, and then whenever the time comes, we'll implement it for corporate. However, a few months down the line, after the feature has been released, it comes out that, oh, another big firm is supposed to join us. And at that point, we're in this limbo state. Why wasn't this implemented before? And why wasn't the corporate given priority? Because they're coming in for that instead of estate planning. And we get into this state where I'm like, we had a discussion and this was the answer. But I didn't have proof or no backing at all. And it's kind of like talking in a silent room where no one's going to hear you because to have voice, you're also supposed to have backing, and backing generally comes in terms of evidences. I've faced this multiple times, even working with like companies, and this is like a crucial life lesson that I've learned from my career. I've dealt with TD insurances many times where they're like, oh, we already, made the notice out there. I'm like, I never received it. Or I had called my insurance company or my phone company to cancel my plan, and they would not listen to me. And then I would be in this limbo state where I had to trace back through my call history to find out, oh, this is the day it happened. So documenting key points of the day. It could be in like you don't have to have a diary or journal or anything. You can have literally your notes app open on your phone and just note it down at that time that, hey, this incident happened on this time and this was the situation. And if it is something that's legitimate, make sure you do a written follow-up. In my case, it would have been best if I sent out an email CCing all the leaders that this is the route we're taking, and this was the final decision at the end of the meeting. If I had done that, it wouldn't have fallen on me that it was my responsibility in the first. So documenting and having hard written communication is always better and something that I've learned from my past, essentially.
Right, right. I believe, like I said, in this field, we really have to be introspective. That's how we find the little gaps in our work, right? Because everything is so technical. You sit behind a screen and
Yeah.
like it's you can lose track of time very easily.
Yep.
So it's really important to document. And perhaps, are you using any like AI features to like document your progress?
Definitely, definitely. I am, using AI a lot more than not. I
Mm-hmm.
initially, when ChatGPT was first launched, I was like, oh, what is this? Because it didn't have that great memory context at that time either. So it was pretty dumb. It was like, okay, I'm talking to a chatbot. It's great, it answers
Mm-hmm.
question, but it's also extremely overconfident. I
Mm-hmm.
suffer from the same problem. I feel like I'm overconfident at times, but AI has a crazy like sense of overconfidence overall. So, one thing that I've noted with AI overall at this point in time is that there's a lot of tools that have expanded into using AI. You can keep track of notes, and this is a little bit of a sneak peek, but I'm also working on a product with a few of my friends. We're planning to do a launch with, universities and school kids, and it is essentially making use of AI for taking notes and also time management. So AI is this tool that you can feed it information and it will make sense out of it. Note taking is great because you can just ask AI that, hey, keep this in mind. If you've set up your AI tools properly, there's AI agents out there that if you can tell them that this is what happened in the meeting, you can set up two different tools with AI agents. One would just store that into your notes file or a folder, and the second one would generate the text that is like the meeting minutes or meeting notes and give you that email ready just for you to review and then click a send button. So I've used that, especially with Teams. Claude has a great agent library that you can really integrate with Teams and Slack as well, where even after a meeting, it would summarize it and you can feed the summary to that. Even Copilot that's offered by Microsoft Suite, it works great at defining what is supposed to be done. I've gone so far to create like work items out of just our meeting notes. As long as in the meeting you're talking clearly definingly that this is the agenda item and it will just create a work item directly into DevOps. So That is something that I really, loved working with AI as well.
Right. So this is like this is like a machine learning project, right? That you talked about, like where you use
Yes,
multi AI agents in collaboration with like apps like Slack and
yes,
what's another like open
Teams
source
and
app? Teams?
Discord is also a great open source. Well, not open source, but you can really work on Discord bots overall as well. And Microsoft Teams has Copilot, but there's like Teams apps. Teams is very limited in terms of how
Mm-hmm.
much your custom integrations you can do. Microsoft has a very rudimentary process where they go through like multiple checks to approve your app to be on the Team store. But, there's a lot of like, especially with AI agents like Claude, and I don't want to be repetitive, but Claude is great of an AI agent. Like you can build like proper workflows with it without delving too much into, oh, I need API access to it. It will literally spin up a Teams on your on this instance and then make use of it as long as you have the credentials for it.
Right. So I know that we have this rapidly evolving field, right? Like
Yeah.
there are new JS frameworks every single day. I feel like every time I blink, I see a new JavaScript framework. So how do you kind of stay in the loop, and what habits have you developed in order to like be on top of your game?
Right. One of the best things, and this goes back to like how I said I learned mostly from visuals and audios. Videos are a great source. There are a few channels on YouTube that are like my go-to. Like there's Tech Linked by Linus Tech Tips. They give you like latest news, and then there's also Fireshoot, which is like a very programming oriented channel, which give you like what is coming up new in the industry. And apart from that, like the way that I approach is that I have set days throughout my week where this is my day to not really go out and be social, but this is my day to sort of recharge myself in terms of what's coming up. That can be by watching a few videos, and then I go to a few websites that have those articles on what the new trends are. So having one day out of your week, it doesn't have to be a whole day. Everyone's busy. Sometimes work till like late, almost 8 p.m. or 9 or 10 p.m. But I'm also a night owl. So right after I'm done dinner from 12 to 2 or 12 to 3, you don't need too many hours a day to catch up for a week's worth of trend changes. And having that dedicated day of your week where regardless of what happens, how tired you are after a gym run or how, exhausted, how overworked you are, if you can stay disciplined enough to read through the articles, go through the videos, and just catching yourself up on new trends and technologies, it's great. Another new thing that I've worked with in it is a bit more on the expensive side is ChatGPT has this plus plan with web research and everything. It's got web search and deep research abilities, which you can feed it a few types of prompts, which really help you give the rundown of what new upgrades have been in technology. And I've recently like subscribed to ChatGPT Plus, but not sponsoring, but uh, I've subscribed to ChatGPT Plus, but it really helps with its agent and deep research and web search mode. It can really go through what the new trends are throughout the tech space. And if I even want my personal space, like I'm more into F1. If I want any updates with F1 transfers or anything, I can also ask that to ChatGPT and it'll search through and give me the latest information. The only thing that I feel like is I can't completely rely on it because sometimes there's one article that it understood wrong and it'll give me wrong information. Just like the AI, blunder that Apple faced, where Apple's AI used to summarize the news completely wrong than what the actual news was. So it's not there where I can just rely on ChatGPT to recover on, like, catch up on the latest on the field. But I think it's a great tool if you're really tired one day and you just need a rundown, like in a summarized version, to just go over talking with ChatGPT.
Right. Absolutely. And like you talked about being disciplined, right? Like consistency is key. I know it's cliche and you see it everywhere, but consist it is key, right?
Definitely, definitely, like I'm I can be very frank with you. I have days when I'm like super lazy and I'm like, oh, I should have just slacked off in this particular thing. And I do sometimes, there are many times a week that I'm like, okay, I'm too tired today. My eyes are closing. I can't stay up. Might as well just sleep and, do this the next day. And I end up doing it. But the two things that I really think are very important is that whenever you form a discipline, just make sure you have a retrospective plan where like this is like such a scrum term, but like if you failed on a particular guideline or deadline that you were supposed to do, that's like your standard. I wake up and do my bed every morning, but for some reason I had a call and I couldn't do it. I had to make sure that I keep track of that and I end up doing it throughout the day at the end of the day. Even if I'm going to be sleeping on the bed, ruining the bed sheet and everything at night. But I had to make sure before I go to bed, I'll do it. So consistency would only stay if you have set that, oh, I'm not going to have 100% rate of doing it every day. There are days when it's just not going to work, but I'm still going to make sure it happens the next time. Another part of it that I just recently learned is that you don't always have to stick to a plan. Um, like I use gym as an example because that's how it was exposed to me. There would be times when I have a workout plan, 3 day, two types of workout spanning over 3 days, sometimes 5 days. And if I mess up one day, I'm like, oh, I've messed up the day, it's gonna mess up the week, and I can't continue forward with it. But one of my friends, she explained it to me that don't stick to the plan that rigidly. Because if you're sticking to a plan that rigidly, you're just going to end up ruining when one thing falls out of the place. So the best way is to keep it like a Gantt chart, where kind of like a waterfall, where if you missed one day, that's okay. Just go to the next day and continue where you left off instead of being very rigidly stuck to what the plan was, what I had to do today. So those are like two things that I really live by at this point.
Absolutely. Like it's you in order to build consistency, if there's a lot of rigidity in what you have to do, you'll you'll just last until your motivation lasts. Like if
That is
one
100%. Yeah, like
if
you're completely right on that.
yeah, if there's like a minor inconvenience or like one thing goes wrong, your whole plan will fall apart. Um, s-
I agree.
so let's just end this episode off on a philosophical note. What
Yeah.
is the best piece of advice you have ever heard or received?
Um, the best piece of advice that I've ever heard and received, and this is something I also live by, is something from Pierre Lassonde when I went for this Lassonde Scholars lunch, and this is something, you know, Pierre Lassonde of York University also lives by. His idea of life is that work on something you're good at, not something you love, because if you are good at something, that instant gratification is going to make you fall in love with it over time. So if you're good at something really great, keep working towards it and excelling at that particular field or industry and be the best at it because you have that backing already. And that is a piece of advice that, you know, I've always thought is a great um, thing to live by because it is great to love something, but at the end of the day, you're not always defined that you would achieve what you love. And we're humans by nature. Our likings changed over time. I used to love Osmos when it first came out, but I'm not a fan of it anymore. And it's very bad to compare like a goal to Osmos because it's food. There's gonna be new changes. But even with like software engineering for now, like I'm good at software engineering, but I also feel like I'm great at math. So it is my backup. As much as I love doing software engineering and I am good at it at a certain extent, we're coming to this saturation point that I believe where it is becoming less and less, important. Like back in the day when software engineering was a rad where everyone was a developer, we're turning into AI agents to build something for us. Now you have to be more of a senior role to look after what the AI agent is working on. So it is not always necessary that you would find or get what you love. But if you're good at something and you keep building atop it, you're always going to reach like a conclusion. And that's why that piece of advice that I heard from Pearson is something that's just stuck by me.
What do you think about delayed gratification?
I think it is also necessary in life, where you're not going to always find that you have achieved something. So even like this goes back to something that I said that yeah, you like something versus you're good at something. If you're good at a particular field, it doesn't mean you're always going to find a solution or, get instant gratification. I was good at soccer, but it wasn't that I've won every match. I've had streaks where I constantly lost one after another, one after another. And at that time, I've faced delayed gratification, even with coding. Like when I used to work on something, sometimes it's instant that I would get a solution, but there would be days where I'm working on the same problem for a few days. It gives me that imposter syndrome where, oh, am I good enough? It does make you re-question yourself, but the biggest part that I believe is that you always have to keep believing in yourself. Gratification is going to come to you, regardless of if it's delayed. But it's very important and core to keep believing in yourself that if you put in the hard work and effort, you are going to get it.
Right. So, yeah, that's all I have for you. This was a very insightful conversation that I'm gonna look back on as well. Um, I am looking forward to your future projects, like the Notes app you talked about. I cannot wait for it to see it grow and take over. Um,
Thank
but
you.
yeah, man, it was truly an honor to have you on my podcast, and I cannot wait to see the amazing things you accomplish.
Thank you, Wanch. And honestly, it's a pleasure of mine to like come to the podcast. I like one thing I love by is like helping people, and I hope that whatever I shared does help someone, you know, get more successful in their life. And I wish everyone the best of luck.
All right,
So
man.
thank you very much for having me here.